Well, Walt and Laura, I want to welcome you both to Washington Times Higher Ground. This is an important conversation today. You are both in the category of detransitioners. And as detransitioners, I want to start with you, Walt, and just asking this question because it feels like this is such an important issue and you both have such important stories. And yet it feels like the mainstream media, they often ignore the stories, they don't tell your stories. Why do you think that is, Walt?
Well, it doesn't cover their narrative. I mean, they've got their financial backing comes from the LGBT, so they don't want to, bite the hand that feeds them. So they're going to do everything they can to muzzle down any voice. I've been out there. My first book I published 18 years ago. I've been helping people for over 25 years. I got my life back in 1990, which is like 34 years ago. And I've been speaking out and writing books about the subject. So, yeah, I'm dangerous to them, and so is Laura.
Yeah, Laura, what would you say? Is there anything you would add to that? Because obviously you have faced the same thing. Your story is more, recent in getting your life back, but yet it feels like in some ways the media is even more hostile or ignoring even more than they have in the past.
Yeah, like Walt said, they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. I think there really is a lot of fear, fear of the backlash, fear of being called hateful, fear of the cancel culture. And I think you're beginning to see it like in Europe. There's a few articles coming out about detransition, about the amount of regrets, but it's really not being covered here. And there's so much evidence out there that's really being ignored.
Yeah, in fact, there have been at least two studies that have come out now, of course, from Europe that are showing that there really hasn't been much to back transitioning young people and putting them through what they've been putting them through. And so these are very alarming, studies to have come out after such, a push, especially in this country. Walt, let's go to you first here on your story because you hinted at this, but you were really one of the first people to speak out on this. And as you said, you've been writing on it and talking about it. Can you give us a snapshot of your story? Because you lived for 8 years as a transgender woman before getting your life back. How did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I started cross dressing 79 years ago in 1944. So I've been dealing with this since 1944, and it was long before they had any terminology or words. And, I was physically abused by my mother. I was physically abused by my father. I was cross dressed by my grandmother, and I was sexually abused by my uncle. So, sexual abuse is the thread that runs through these issues. And so, I'm clear now in hindsight. I'll be 84 this year. I know I only look 45, but I'm 84. And, the fact of the matter is, I look back, and if you look at my website that I put up there, I just say getting your life back. I don't ascribe to the idea that I'm a detransitioner. I had all the surgery, I had all the hormones. I took hormones for over 20 years. I had surgery 41 years ago. And so, I lived all that life. But the fact of the matter is that it didn't ever change me to a female. So when I look at the whole thing was a cosmetic process. So, biblically speaking, there was really no transition. And you can identify as a transgender, you just can't become a transgender. And the fact of the matter is, sexual abuse is not gender dysphoria. So, these are the things that I've looked back on and see if I would have had some intellectual wisdom, I would have fought back and say, no, when you diagnose me with gender dysphoria, you're diagnosing somebody who is traumatized by sexual and physical and emotional and psychological abuse before he was 9 years old. So the narrative, by saying there's a detransitioner, in my view, and I realize I'm in a limited view, probably only one, but in my view, it says that somebody actually transitioned. I don't believe anybody's ever transitioned from one gender to the other. You can identify as a different gender. You just can't really biologically, medically, or scientifically change your gender.
Well, and I think you raise an interesting point there because, as I said at the top, you're both placed under this category of detransitioner, right? Because I think people are looking for a terminology to help sort of encapsulate and understand what is going on. But in describing that, you raise a very interesting point about the fact that gender cannot actually be changed, right? That this is not something that can actually happen. So you're not really, but the terminology, again, I think is used to try to help people wrap their heads around it. But again, interesting point. And Laura, I want to go to you on this because your story is a little bit different in some ways and how you ended up there. But talk a little bit. You also lived for 8 years as a transgender man. So talk about how you landed there.
Yeah, and I had some of the same experiences as far as sexual abuse in childhood. I was molested at 8, and it only happened once. It was not an ongoing thing, and sometimes I always felt like, well, I wasn't as traumatized or something. That wasn't really a big deal. It was a sexual play with another boy in my mind at the time. So I didn't call it abuse until I was in my 30s. But it really had a profound effect on me. But also, I think today, a lot of kids are really being influenced by pornography exposure.
Mhm.
And but one of the things that really led me into that lifestyle, I had a lot of anger as a kid toward my mom, and there were various things that I could point to. Didn't feel like I fit in with the girls, but I think what really began to drive me down that road even more was in high school. I turned away from the Lord. I told God I would never serve Him again. And I got into a lot of sexual sin. I was trying so hard to find love, to feel accepted, to find value and worth. And the more that I gave away, the more I felt used and abused and dumped and rejected over and over and over and over again. And I really began to lose my identity and my self worth. And I finally just decided, the reason this never works out, the reason I'm never happy is because I was supposed to be the man. If I was the man, then, I know how to treat a woman. And I never realized how much sowing sexual sin into those relationships was damaging me. We think sometimes that God is just holding out on us, that God just doesn't want us to have fun, but God was really trying to protect us. And now that I'm on the other side and I can see the difference between sexual sin and what God intends in marriage is just an astounding difference. And that's one thing I want to help young people understand is it's really good to wait on God's timing because it really did so much damage to me psychologically to be in that amount of sexual sin.
Yeah, and so there's overlap there, and then there are other elements of what was happening, and so many people. I mean, we're seeing surveys showing that substantial proportions of young people are identifying as being part of the LGBTQ community. You're seeing, the culture sort of shape people in so many ways, and we won't get into a lot of that today because I want to focus on your stories and what you were just saying, how you want to help people, but let's talk about obviously both of you, and I'll come to you on this first, Walt. You both made decisions not just to socially attempt to live as the other gender, but surgical decisions. And as comfortable as you are sharing with us, because I want people to get a sense of how this impacted your life, what you decided to do, and how that changed your life during this time period and after. And I know that's a broad question, but I'll throw to you first, Walt.
Yeah, it should only take me about an hour to answer that one, but I'll get into it. So, the fact of the matter is, I never dove into homosexuality. That was never one of my things. I never had same sex attraction issues. And I'll say at the outset, the thousands of people that have contacted me through my website, Sex Change Regret, I think that they check out my story and look at my background because over 90% of the individuals who contact me are not homosexual, they're heterosexual men. A vast majority of them have been married with children like I was. So I was married 15 years when I went into this in 1942. And the issue is that I went to a gender therapist. In fact, Dr. Paul Walker was my therapist. Walker is the guy who drafted the original standards of care. They were called the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care, and they morphed into WPATH. He was my therapist. Well, you can see he was wrong when he diagnosed me with gender dysphoria before it ever became a terminology. So I think what I've found is when I opened up my website and had people start contacting me and start writing me, there weren't many people out there doing the work that I was doing. And so we were getting thousands of people. literally, we've had over 2 million come to the website. And so, what I found is that they all had some adverse childhood experience. They're called ACEs. And so when I realized that, I realized that this is the message that needs to get out, that the people that write me, they don't have gender dysphoria. It's a false diagnosis in the cases that come to me. So we were able to identify what happened to them to cause them to not like who they are. And so once we work through that, whether it was sexual abuse, whether it's abandonment, alcoholic parents, the parents were in prison, divorce, there's all kinds of things that attribute to somebody not wanting to be who they are or even living in an unsafe house. And today, I work with Lucas Miles at the Influence Network. Sex Change Regret now is we're putting up billboards nationwide across major highways. We're going to put this in several hundred churches, and so we're sort of not franchising it. We're doing it for free actually, but we're moving this into hundreds of churches. And I just completed co-authoring a full-length feature film called "Who Am I?" With Ascend Pictures. We just finished that a month ago. So, we keep reaching out, and we're going to continue to do that. And that's been my ministry, for over 25 years.
Walt, just one quick follow-up question before I come to you, Laura. So is there a difference between people who have those traumas, in your view, and gender dysphoria? Are these separate things? Do they sometimes coalesce together? I'm just curious, your take and your experience dealing with people who struggle.
You're probably not going to like my answer, but I'm going to let you know anyway. And the people, and I'm just talking about the people that I work with, they don't have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is used so that they can access hormones and surgery. And this is just in the people I work with. I'm not saying they have dysphoria. All of them have dysphoria, but it's not related to their gender. It's related to something that happened to them in their childhood. And that is what we call adverse childhood experience. So once we have a conversation and about these issues, they realize that they didn't have gender dysphoria. They actually will tell me they didn't have gender dysphoria, and the boys they wanted to be fathers. But for me, I had the top and bottom surgery, and I did all the stuff. I had all the hormones. I did everything they said that's going to fix me, and it is probably the biggest lie, fraud there ever's been, because now my surgeon, Dr. Biber, who performed 5,000 of these, and Dr. Walker both co-signed a letter to Superior Court of California, San Mateo, stating in that letter to Superior Court, when I was trying to change my birth record back to Walt higher male, that hormones and surgery do not change your gender. That's the doctors and the therapists both in a document, an affidavit to court. Does not change your gender. So I'm not just making it up. The doctors and the therapists both say, your gender is innate and it's fixed at conception. It's not assigned at birth. Another big part of the lie. So when we hear these terminologies, all of them are geared to make you think that hormones and surgery change you. They don't.
Well, I don't dislike your answer. I actually find it really interesting and illuminating, and that's why we wanted to have this conversation, because we don't hear these perspectives now. Laura, for you, I just want to say too, your journey in your life, and I want you to tell it, but it's been fun to interview you over the years and interact with you, because you've gotten married. You've really rebuilt your life after coming out of this, lifestyle and what you were going through. But can you talk about surgery and the impact of these very permanent decisions that you made? How did that change you? How have you coped and dealt with those issues?
Yeah, that's been a difficult thing, because a lot of times, people hear the story and they see the pictures and everything, and oh, look, she was able to go back to fully being female and she's married and all these things, and it's been wonderful. But the reality of the damage that the surgeries did. When I first got married, I've since gotten implants, but when I first got married, I didn't have any breasts. And even after the implant surgery, I mean, it's just not real. And there's a big difference in the way that feels. And I'm just aware of it a lot of times. In fact, for the first year, I could almost feel it moving a little bit. It was a very strange experience. But also the biggest thing for me is that I had a hysterectomy and had the ovaries removed. And when I was single, I mean, I kind of wanted kids. I was like, oh, I wish I would have, still had that option, but it wasn't a big deal. But after I got married, that desire became awakened like I had never experienced before. And it was this really intense desire. And I didn't realize that God intended that in marriage. A 15, 16-year-old kid is not supposed to want kids. And that's why, these kids are always saying, well, I don't care if I have kids one day. It's not a big deal if I become infertile. Well, they don't understand what they're giving up. And I have cried myself to sleep so many nights, just deep, deep regret and grief and longing to know what it would have been like for Perry and I to have a child, what the two becoming one would look like, what their personality would be like, what their names would be. And I've just dreamed about these things, and it's a loss that can't be fixed. As much as God redeems and restores, and He brought me a stepson. My stepson's grown though; he's 21, but it doesn't take away that pain and that regret and that loss. And I can't fix that.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the story people don't hear. And, as we have this debate as a culture, especially right now, young people, kids, I mean, making this decision as an adult is heartbreaking enough. But when these decisions are made for kids, I mean, I'll start with you on this, Laura, but what concerns you most in light of what you just described about young people? I mean, you hear these stories of 13-year-olds and younger, going through hormones and maybe even surgeries like what you faced.
Oh, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And one of the things I've discovered, God has really given my husband and I the desire to teach God's design of male and female and going into biological differences and how God is glorified in our design. And one of the things I discovered is that the entire female body is created to create and bear and nurture and foster life. Really, the entire body is designed for baby. And it was so heartbreaking. And I had to really wrestle through a lot of grief and a lot of anger, like, what, Lord, why are you asking me to do this? But I realized too that ultimately this points to a greater spiritual reality for anyone that has had these surgeries. That it speaks to our relational nature. So there's ways that God redeems that, but I really want kids to understand that there is a profound design to this that is so just completely stolen by these surgeries. Such a permanent decision. I mean, this is not Mrs. Potato Head. We can't pop on and pop off parts. And there's such a profound loss. And I have seen so much grief, and I've had people contact me just thinking their life is over. Like, how do I go back from this? And that's a really difficult road to walk.
Yeah, Walt, and hearing what Laura's saying and hearing what you were saying, you obviously mentioned being married for 15 years. There's obviously the physical elements of what you give up when you go through surgery, but then there's the emotional, the familial. How did this affect your family and your life when you made this decision and you said, this is what I'm going to do? I really believe this lie. I'm going to go all in.
Yeah, it was like setting a bomb off in a good family. It destroyed it. And, it's my own selfish, actions, because I didn't know how to deal with being sexually abused and emotionally abused and psychologically abused. It took me a long time. It took me until 1990 when I was redeemed and restored by Christ. And by the way, next month will be married again for 27 years to a wonderful lady. Her only pitfall is she graduated from Berkeley, but we can't fault her too much for that. But so, and she's been a great part of the ministry and supreme part of my life. And so, you can't really explain to people the impact of all the things that happen, the impact on my children, the impact on your marriage, and the impact on you emotionally and psychologically. I mean, it's no one has ever needed hormones and surgery for the purpose of changing genders. This is it's so barbaric. I've had one young man, he was 18 years old, wrote me and he said, I feel like a Frankenstein monster. And I said, that actually is kind of appropriate. It's sort of like a Frankenstein surgery because all they're doing is mutilating people. So my kind of position on this is we devalue people when we tell them the lie that they can change genders. We dehumanize people when we give them hormones, and then we destroy them when we cut them up and do surgery on them. So it's either devalue, dehumanize, and destroy. That's all this whole ideology is, that they put the name transgenderism on.
For you, Walt, and I'm going to ask you the same question, Laura, because this is important. You obviously mentioned your faith and coming to faith. Well, what was the moment that you realized, was it before or after faith? And take us through it, that this has been a lie. I need to go back. This can't be my identity, and my identity has to fall under something bigger. What was that sort of the snap out of it moment for you?
Yeah, well,
Well, it was actually more of a long journey because I was aware the entire time. I mean, I could suppress it at times, but I was always aware that this was a lie, that this was not real. It felt very artificial, and I was aware that I'm injecting myself with testosterone to make these changes happen, and I'm having surgeries to make it look like this. And so I remember the frustration of thinking like, okay, I've had this surgery now, it still doesn't feel real, and at what point does this become real? And I had always planned to have genital reassignment surgery. And I was so angry when I looked at the surgeries and I realized how fake this all was. And I felt so duped. And so there was that realization, but I didn't want to be a woman. There was so much pain there. And I didn't even know why. I had deep issues with my mother from childhood. And really, she doesn't deserve all the anger I had toward her, but it just built over time as I refused to forgive her. And I held on to so much bitterness and unforgiveness. And but it wasn't until I came to faith in Christ and I got radically saved and I was so on fire for Jesus and I wanted to be a man of God. I knew this was not God's will. I knew that he did not intend me to be transgender, but I didn't think I could go back. It's like, well, I'm sorry, God, I repent of this. I know this wasn't your will, but I've had all these surgeries now. I have all this facial hair. I had a deeper voice. I can't go back now. So I was just going to be a man of God. But the Lord kept drawing me and kept convicting me. And he was pouring his word into me. And it really, one of my life verses is Psalm 107:20 that says, he sent his word to heal them and to deliver them from their destructions. And the word of God just began to renew my mind. And the Lord was just convicting me over and over. And I found myself in this deep, dark pit that I kind of couldn't get out of. I knew the Lord was asking me to walk away and to leave it all behind. And it reminded me of Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. It says, if anyone will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever will save his life shall lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his own soul? Or what shall he give in exchange for his soul? And I had a clear vision of Jesus Christ getting down on one knee, and he reached his hand down in this pit, and he just asked me, do you trust me? And he was asking me to walk away from it all, to deny myself. And that's so important because that's not taught in our churches a lot. We're taught to, ask Jesus in our heart, but this society tells us to embrace ourselves, to trust in our heart, and the opposite of what the Bible says. And the Lord was telling me to not trust in my heart, but to trust in him and to deny myself and follow him.
And how terrifying that must have been to say, you know what, I'm going to step out and I'm going to go back to where I'm supposed to be, where I'm intended to be. That had to have been very scary for you. And Walt, for you, in light of your journey, what was your moment, your snap out of it moment where you realized that this was not what God intended?
Yeah, it wasn't a snap out moment, actually. I was studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz. I became a counselor in a church where I was head of counseling there. And I just kind of began to learn over a period of time in my studies and working with people that so many elements that we don't understand about what happens to us during our childhood if we don't directly deal with them with a trauma therapist or some good therapist, we will fall into this pit and think that we're going to get saved by doing hormones and surgery. So I realized that there was the possibility existed that I went for this surgical procedure to take off my genitals because I didn't ever want to be molested again. And so that would prevent anybody from touching me, wouldn't it? So that seems a little crazy, but I've actually had other people tell me that that's why they did it. I didn't really, quote, want to become a female. I just did not want to ever be touched there again. And that was what I did. And so I think it's complicated. There's many layers to this, and it takes a long time to unravel it. And so I went to my therapist after identifying as a female for about 7 years. And I said, well, how long does it take before this works? And she said, oh, give it more time. And so kind of like Laura, it's like, yeah, okay, what is it? I mean, the fact of the matter is, I began to realize that you don't change. This doesn't change you. All you do is change the way you look, and it destroys your life. That's not the way to resolve the issues of your identity. Your issues of identity should be that in Jesus Christ. And when I realized that, and I was in a prayer with another person, and the Lord actually came to me in that prayer and held me in his arms and said, you are now safe with me forever. That was the day that I was redeemed and restored to Jesus Christ. And so I've walked with him ever since that day.
It's incredible to hear you both talk about this journey. And Walt, I'm going to start with you here, but when this happened, when you were redeemed and you came out of this, culture looked very different from where it looks right now. So Walt, what is it like for you coming out of your story to watch a culture move to a place where not only is this something that is very accepted, it's often pushed on people, inserted into media and movies, and particularly pushed on young people? What has that been like for you to watch?
Well, obviously, we're destroying an entire generation of children. That's just the bottom line. Sorry, but none of these kids are going to be able to produce sperm. Many of the women won't be able to have babies. So this is sort of an abortion 2.0. We're destroying their ability to be mothers and fathers. That's a pretty sad commentary. And so this is one of the reasons why I wrote this movie, screenplay called Who Am I? And it was taken from a poem that I did identifying as Laura. It was titled Who Am I? And I'm reaching out to the Lord in the poem. Are you there? Can you help me? I'm broken by my past. Can you help me? Please come to me. And so I realized that the people who are, suffering, because they are suffering from something that happened, the problem is the gender clinics aren't looking to them and telling them, hey, you had something happen to you. Let's find out what that is. Let's dig in. You don't need hormones. You don't need surgery because it's not going to change your gender and it's only going to harm you. We need to begin to fight back and just tell the truth. And I've had people write me, Billy, when one guy wrote me and said, I'm transgender, I transition, I have gender dysphoria. I've been working with my gender therapist for years. And I said, well, you're not a transgender. You didn't transition and you probably didn't have gender dysphoria. I worked with a guy and we identified it within 1 week of what happened to him. And he had been suffering for 60 years. And we were able to do that in a week. And he wept, realizing that nobody just told him the truth. This is why language is so important. If we don't begin to take back the language, I'm not going to use the LGBT language. I'm going to use the language about the Lord Jesus Christ. You are a man. Yeah, you got mutilated by surgery. You took hormones. You can be redeemed and restored to Jesus Christ. Yeah, you may have some body parts that are harmed, but that doesn't mean that you aren't a good servant for the Lord Jesus Christ. So, I just want people to know the language is important. As long as we keep using the language, people are going to continue to keep doing it. So I'm clawing that language back. I'm not going to use it.
Well, it's amazing to hear you talk about that hope. I mean, how sad that somebody went 60 years going to see all these professionals who were supposed to help him and nobody helped him until he reached you. And after a week of working with you was able to 60 years versus a week. That is alarming. And Laura, I look to you on this because you're watching the culture. We spoke a little bit earlier about this. What has it been like for you to be fighting this battle to get information out, to point people to the truth, and yet to have the culture moving so rapidly in the other direction?
Yeah, and I think that is one thing we're seeing, especially with the young kids, that, like Walt said, they have something adverse childhood experience. They have some kind of trauma. Everybody I've ever talked to, and I've talked to lots of parents too, where the child may not understand this right now. They may not say, "Oh no, I never had any trauma," but the parents like, "No, there was divorce, there was abuse, whatever it might be." But what's happening too is the social media is playing an enormous role in this. And I've been studying the algorithms a lot, and TikTok is one of the worst about this. And what they do when you create an account, they push out a bunch of random videos to you that are popular, and so they determine what you're interested in by how long you linger on it. So if a kid is just curious, maybe they've not even thought about being transgender before, but if they kind of linger on that video, then the algorithm tells it that they're interested in that, and so it will pump out more and more and more videos. And so all of a sudden you're being brainwashed by this 24/7, as these kids are on this for hours sometimes. And so, or same thing on YouTube, you look up a video and then all of a sudden there's all these videos. So there's this dual nature of, there's things that have happened to them. They don't like themselves. They don't like their body parts. There's trauma they haven't dealt with. And then they're being fed this diet of, this is the solution, that is, alive from the pit of hell. And it's like, it's just brainwashing these kids.
Well, and you both, and so do others with similar stories, you face this influx of media, right? I mean, the media, all the information coming on the other side. How have you both, and I'll start with you, Walt, dealt with critics, dealt with people in the media, the LGBTQ community, people who would doubt your stories, come after your stories? How have you dealt with that? Has it been difficult?
That I got to laugh a little bit on that one, Billy, because I've been out there a long time, and so I had somebody write me recently that had a lot of really vulgar language in it, and he was saying, "Hurry up and die, old man! I'm sick and tired of you," and he was very abusive and so forth. So this is how I deal with people, my critics. I wrote him back and said, "I'm 83. Be patient. It won't be long."
So a little bit of humor and forgiveness, right? A little bit of, that's what you have to do, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Laura, do you get a lot of pushback?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I haven't, Walt's probably had a lot more than I have. I think the Lord, as I was growing in my faith and I was growing in ministry, the Lord told me one time he was shielding me there for a while as I was kind of growing and getting more rooted in my faith. Lately, I've started receiving a lot more, and I actually didn't realize how much hate was out there about me. So I said this one time that I really haven't received that much, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, you do. You need to go read the comments." And so I've just not gone and like looked at the critical comments a lot. But I do get, I got this really hateful email the other day that was calling us a cult and all this, and lots of curse words and all caps. And, but it was funny in that moment. I just felt sorry for them. And I knew this person was deceived. And I remember what it's like, because I would have been that person, years ago, saying how hateful somebody like me was. And I think in those moments, though, we as Christians, we need to trust the Lord. There's a verse in Psalms that says that he will keep us secret in the secret of his presence from the pride of man. He will keep us secretly in his tabernacle from the strife of tongues. And whenever I have faced opposition, I've had protesters and different things. I mean, I have had some experiences now in the last couple of years. And when I do, I really just feel sorry for him. And this peace comes over me, and God opens my eyes to how he sees them. And just one quick example, there was I was at an event actually with Kirk Cameron in Fayetteville, and there were these protesters there, and they were in these like really weird costumes. They're the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, they call themselves. And they had the sign, "Is it brave?" Because it was Brave Books. "Is it brave to scare trans kids?" And I'm like, who's scaring the kids? Like, so it's been interesting to deal with, but honestly, they need Jesus.
Well, and that helps me dovetail into the final question I want to ask you both, because Walt, when we look at this, it's very interesting because the tides are shifting, and we're talking here about your experiences, but obviously what Laura just said, they need Jesus. From a Christian perspective, this is very clear. What is going on is very clear. Ephesians 6, spiritual warfare. There's a spiritual element to all of this, but we're even seeing people in the mainstream who are maybe very progressive people, or they're not Christians, who are also starting to come out against what we're talking about here, against these attempts to transition gender, which again, as you were saying, is not possible. We're watching them have a clarity on it from just a human sense, not a spiritual sense. Why do you think that is, Walt?
Well, I think it takes a long time for society to get their head screwed on straight after something like that. You remember the frontal lobotomy and how long that actually played out for about 45 or 50 years. And eventually, they don't do it anymore, at least nobody knows about it. But it was publicly touted as being really good, fantastic stuff, right? And so people were getting a lot of accolades, but this stuff flames out. We realized that there's a great deal of harm. And now many more people are coming out saying they've been harmed by this. And that's what's going to happen. I mean, I'm working with people in Europe, media people in Europe, because of it's happening over there. And I've been in many countries around the world working with individuals. So I think we're coming to a point where, they're going to continue doing this. People are going to continue to do it because there's people who are always going to push it. But I think the numbers we're going to see start to dwindle. And certainly with the 23 states now stopping children, I think we're making a lot of headway. And I think we need to keep speaking out. And again, that's why I'm doing the movie, because there isn't a movie like it. And Ascend Pictures and myself, I'm partnered with Sean Sorgosi, and Lucas Miles also is probably going to help a little bit with that. And so, these are important times, and we're going to get the message out. It's all about the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think, that's where we come to it, right? God didn't want us to have our bodies totally mutilated. We were there to, have the ability to have children, to produce children, sperm, and build families. And what they're doing is trying to take a hammer to everything that God's designed about children and family and church is. So we need to fight back, and churches need to step up and start talking about this from the pulpit. I spoke day before yesterday in Florida at a church on Sunday, and they were thrilled to have this information on Sunday church.
Well, Laura, I'm going to give you the final word here on all of this, if you want to talk about the cultural piece, but we'll conclude with you here.
Yeah, I just want to say that as Christians, we really need to be putting the truth out there. I think sometimes we're always kind of playing defense, and Jesus said that the gates of hell would not prevail against the church. That we're on the offense. The light is the one that dispels the darkness, and as long as we continue to hide in our little holes and be afraid that the culture is going to come after us, we're not going to be effective. But if we continue to put the truth out there, share these videos, share testimonies of people that have come out, continue to put this out there, because most of the people that are coming to me have found my videos. And so I think that it is such an amazing place to be able to reach out into this culture and to put the truth out there. And God will bring people to those videos. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. And so, and just wanted to say, my husband and I have just started this ministry. So we've only been open a couple of months, but we really want to help teach and equip the church. So you can check us out on edensredemption.org. And please support us and reach out. We'd be glad to talk to anybody who would like more information.
Well, I thank you both so much for taking your time, sharing your stories, and just being with us today. Really appreciate it.